I think there's another quarterback that's going to be on the market soon that the 49ers are going to want to take a look at, and he's in Minnesota right now. I think we all know the history between Kyle Shanahan and Kirk Cousins. This is something that's been going on for years. I've never seen somebody want a quarterback as bad as Kyle Shanahan has, and it was a deal that almost happened too. Kirk Cousins almost wound up with Kyle in San Francisco. It did not, and I think they're waiting for that deal to wrap up, maybe even a trade. We don't know if that could actually happen, but these are things that are on the table.
Reckless speculation.
That was Dianna Russini this morning on Get Up. This is Purple Daily on 1500 scorenorth.com, the Score North app, and streaming live on Twitter, Twitch, and Facebook. Ramie Makhlouf in the TCL broadcast studios. In for Matthew Collar today and tomorrow, and alongside Courtney Cronin of ESPN.com. Or do we call you Courtney, our draft scout? Was that a permanent thing, or was that temporary?
It's a permanent thing.
Okay. So
permanent through the draft.
Courtney, our draft scout, with us
We
here.
have a bump for it and everything, but I don't know if we have any Courtney, our draft scout themed content today. That's probably going to come for tomorrow, because you can't just, you can't blow it all at once. I mean, you got to spread it out throughout the week.
We'll save that for tomorrow, because Dianna Russini gave us, gave us plenty to talk about here, at least in the next 25 minutes before we're joined later in the show by a guest to talk about this CBA deal that keeps hitting snags and I'm afraid is going to affect football Christmas. But we'll get details on that coming up at 12:30. Dianna Russini, you heard it right there, saying that the 49ers probably not in on Tom Brady, she thinks, because they might wait and see what happens with Kirk Cousins and his contract situation. Of course, 1 year left on his deal. Does have a no trade clause, but she threw in there, or maybe a trade, Courtney.
To clarify what the no trade clause is, that's his leverage. He can turn down any sort of trade he wants if that was presented to him, if the Vikings and another team were able to work one out. It's Kirk's deal. Like, it's basically, it's on him, his decision. It's no trade clause and no transition tag for 2021. So if he wanted to go to the San Francisco 49ers, if somehow there was a trade that came to fruition where Jimmy Garoppolo would come to Minnesota, finish out whatever's left on his contract, Kirk goes to San Francisco, gets to reunite with his former offensive coordinator, it is possible if he says yes. That is obviously if they found it, the trade partners were in line and the whole deal was set up. But yeah, I mean, it is reckless speculation season, and the topic at hand, what Dianna was talking about on Get Up, and what's been talked about for the last, 2 or 3 weeks, is Tom Brady.
Right. That's how this came up.
That's how this whole thing came up, and it's just an interesting thing to point out, just because of how close this deal was to happening before they got Jimmy Garoppolo in the trade, and the 49ers now, at least on this trajectory with Garoppolo, that's his team. Because I was out in the Bay Area when this whole thing was kind of unfolding after Shanahan was hired, and then you go through that 2017 season, you think, okay, is it possible? But they traded for him Garoppolo, that is, midway through the season, so then that kind of nixed his plans. But going into that, once he was hired, you thought, okay, it's only a matter of time before Cousins gets here. And I know that Kyle's talked about it publicly, that was his quarterback. That's who he wanted initially, before obviously they're in the situation.
Yeah, the relationship and mutual admiration between those two guys is no secret. Shanahan and Cousins, they were together a long time in Washington, and like you said, Shanahan has made no secret that Kirk Cousins was the guy that he wanted to be his quarterback, and Kirk Cousins has made no secret of how much he liked playing for Kyle Shanahan and working in that system. And it's a similar system here, but it's not Kyle Shanahan's system exactly, and he really enjoyed his time playing for Kyle Shanahan, playing in that system in Washington. So if there was a team that Cousins might waive his no trade clause for, I'm not saying would, but might, this seems like a good fit if the Vikings wanted to explore that possibility.
Yeah, and he said before that he wants to finish out his career in Minnesota. I mean, that's where he sees himself
but that's what guys
long-term.
say.
But if there was any sort of fit, the guy who brought him up in this system in Washington, basically a version of the system that they're running now, because obviously, Kyle Shanahan's father is Mike, who worked with Gary Kubiak for a very long time in Denver. So, I mean, the offense would be very similar. I mean, we saw Jimmy Garoppolo bootleg his way into a Super Bowl this year. I mean, they would be running a very similar version of what they did with Garoppolo as they would with Cousins, because I think you can really look at both quarterbacks and see a lot of similarities. And I would put Kirk in the upper, I guess I'd give him the edge there in terms of who you'd probably want on your team and who really overall is a better quarterback. But that being said, if you could unload that cap hit, if you could unload the financial responsibility and not have to have the responsibility of an extension, and whatever sort of financial bearings that would come with Cousins, I think that there's reason to at least argue that you'd want to do it.
And there's a common misconception out there about Cousins' no trade clause or what the cap hit would be if they did trade him.
There's some dead money in it. I know that.
If they do it before June 1st, Collar
it's like
just
$1 million.
Yeah, he just tweeted me this the other day. I think it's $1.9 million because we were talking about before this even came up, the possibility of a Cousins trade. And he said it was a $31 or $34 million cap hit and then corrected himself after doing a little digging. So I think if they do it before June 1st, it's a $1.9 million cap hit.
Yeah, it's so he's got a $31 million hit in 2020. So once the new league year kicks in, his base salary is $29.5 million. It's all fully guaranteed. The workout bonus, $500,000 is guaranteed. The proration part of his signing bonus, that's all guaranteed too. And it's $1 million in dead money. So if he agreed to it, and that's the bottom line here, is as we speculate about potential fits and other things like that in trade talks, because again, this is all centered around Tom Brady, and I'm really looking forward to what Monday brings us because it just kind of feels like this whole thing, he's the first domino to fall, and I just wonder how quickly in succession so many others do. Because since Tom Brady's been dominating the airwaves and really the whole free agent quarterback market, we haven't talked that much about a Kirk Cousins extension because there hasn't been that much buzz about one yet, which leads me to believe that the numbers that are being presented to Cousins by the Vikings are not ones that he's necessarily in agreement with and wants to go ahead and sign an extension before free agency. There was a prerogative here for the Vikings to get this done before free agency because then it opens up more opportunities for them to free up cap space, to be active in free agency, be lowering his cap number for 2020, as we just mentioned, is a $31 million hit. That's a lot. That's 16-point-something% of the cap.
Right.
Getting that number down is imperative for this team. You have how many days until Wednesday?
5 days. No, 6 days. I'm sorry.
6 days.
I can do math on the year.
It's a week. So yeah, today's Tuesday. So trying to get that deal done in the meantime is of the utmost importance for the Vikings, but it just doesn't feel like it's going to come to fruition before that. So I'm curious to see kind of what the next week brings, because as we know, the legal tampering period opens at noon on Monday, and I anticipate there being a lot of movement when that thing happens.
You brought two things to mind for me. One concerning Kirk Cousins, one concerning the Minnesota Vikings. As it pertains to Cousins, and I've been saying this for a couple of weeks now, it might have been an article from you that I read at ESPN.com that sort of made me come to this realization. Kirk Cousins, I think, has leverage right now where he stands, and a lot of leverage. And if I'm him, I'm not signing anything in the next 6 days because the price for quarterbacks is always going up. And I don't know that it'll ever go up in one offseason as much as it will this offseason because of the number of quarterbacks and the caliber of quarterbacks that are out there on the free agent market. If he waits until after Tom Brady and the rest of the dominoes fall this year, or even waits until next offseason, where I haven't looked at the free agent class of quarterbacks for 2021, but I would imagine he'll be at or near the top of that class of quarterbacks, which is that means that he'll be in demand and can probably find at least two teams that are willing to get into a bidding war for him, like he did when he got the contract with the Vikings. If I'm Kirk Cousins, I'm waiting at least a couple weeks to see where all the dominoes fall this offseason, and I'm probably waiting till next offseason to really maximize how much I can make on this next contract.
I mean, that's the leverage that he's earned.
Right.
Whether you like him or not, he has earned that type of leverage because he won the playoff game. He did the one thing in his career that he had yet to do, and the team that signed him, they never said, we signed Kirk Cousins to come win a Lombardi trophy. The next step. So he reached the next step. So that was the leverage that he created for himself. And really, the ball's in his court with that. And we can get into what that does for him in terms of the perception by the fan base, because I think it honestly puts him on thin ice, and I'll explain. But wait until Dak Prescott gets that $33 million a year deal. Wait until see potentially even next season. I know you mentioned the free agent quarterback class. Wait till Patrick Mahomes gets his deal.
Right.
And I'm not saying Kirk is going to be anywhere close to the $200 million quarterback deal that we anticipate for Mahomes. But if he's aiming for a $35 million a year deal, similar to what Russell Wilson has, His agent certainly has a lot of work to do to kind of convince an organization like the Vikings or elsewhere that, hey, I mean, he hasn't won a Super Bowl, but he's worthy of this much. But when you take a look at what other quarterbacks are going to be getting within this bubble, that I don't know when it's going to pop. I guess it can I think we anticipate it popping after the Mahomes deal, or at least somehow coming back down to earth, because are we going to start paying quarterbacks $41-42 million a year after that? I don't know. But the situation he's in now, by signing a deal, by taking a hometown discount, he really does do himself a disservice by not waiting to see what other guys are going to get, because we know this quarterback market, somebody's the richest quarterback in the league for a cup of coffee.
Right.
And even Kirk, I mean, I remember back in 2018, he was the richest quarterback in the NFL on an average year basis for about 5 seconds until Matt Ryan signed his deal.
I was working in Milwaukee at the time, and people were laughing at the Vikings like, they think Kirk Cousins is worthy of being the highest paid quarterback in the league. And I looked around and I went, they don't think he's the best quarterback in the league. He was just the best option this offseason, and so they had to pay top market price for him. That's how free agency usually works. And you're right. He won't get Patrick Mahomes money. He won't get Deshaun Watson money or Lamar Jackson money. But as those guys keep resetting the market, it trickles down, and the rank and file behind them will make more than they would have previous to those contracts being signed.
Yeah, and I think that even with Tom Brady, because we know the Patriots don't do deals at market value,
right?
Let's see what he gets.
Right.
He could be in that same sort of range, certainly. To at least if you look at the last 5 quarterback deals that have been done, Russell Wilson, Ben Roethlisberger, Aaron Rodgers in there, he's obviously in that range still, even coming upon his 43rd birthday and playing for however many more years. I know he wants to play till he's 45. So you're going to see him get a deal that's at market value. And if he is the first domino to fall in free agency, then the other deals are going to kind of fall in line behind that. You're going to start to see where the whole thing evens out. And then Kirk may say, okay, now that I've seen what everybody else is getting, now I'll go ahead and do this. And even still, the Vikings could be active in the first wave of free agency. Let's say they get something done with Cousins, an extension early on next week, either in the legal tampering window, which, I mean, that doesn't matter for them. I'm just, in terms of days, that's where I'm thinking, because he's obviously under contract. He's with the team. They can do it whenever they want. They could have done it in the middle of the season last year.
Yeah.
But, the Vikings certainly want to be active in free agency, and they need the financial wherewithal to do that. So I've said this from the beginning, even going into the combine, I always felt like Cousins was the first thing that they had to get figured out. And I know that they're actively trying to do that. But like Dianna mentioned, maybe the reason the 49ers are in this holding pattern, potentially, I mean, they already have a quarterback under contract. They may not want Tom Brady at all. Like,
I think it's a $4.5 million cap hit if they trade Garoppolo or cut him. Yeah.
Sure. But Cousins' contract is up after 2020. Let's say the Vikings and Cousins can't come to an agreement on an extension, and he becomes a lame duck quarterback, so to speak, going into his last season. He plays out this year. He could go there next year, and then they can worry about whatever they want to do with moving Garoppolo via trade. Like, this could all end up playing out to exactly how she was speculating on, just with the movement piece, the part of it, the pieces that would have to go in succession for Cousins to get there. Maybe it's all a matter of time and waiting, because it kind of benefits him to wait just from his perspective of seeing what everybody else gets, but also maybe his better fit, or maybe where he wants to be eventually would be somewhere else. And he only has to wait another year of playing in this offense to do that.
Now, like I said, Cousins has the leverage. If we're talking about negotiations between Cousins and the Vikings, sure. I think the way that the Vikings can flip the script a little bit and gain some leverage themselves in this whole thing is you go to Kirk Cousins. You said Cousins has said in the past, I want to finish out my career in Minnesota. I think that's just something guys say because it doesn't look good to the hometown fans. If you were to say otherwise, it feels like, yeah, Minnesota's cool, but I could go play somewhere else and be happy.
Yeah, I don't expect the next 3 years to go so well. So we're gonna see how this whole thing shakes out.
But let's say he means it. Let's take him at face value and say he means it. That's got to be a two-way street. And the Vikings have to say, well, we want you to be a Viking for the rest of your career, and we're willing to pay you to do just that. If they go to him and they say, look, we're not sold on you as our quarterback beyond 2020. You have 1 year left on this contract. Let us explore some deals for you. And you go to the 49ers and you say, you really want Kirk Cousins? Why don't you get him now? Because we all know the window doesn't stay open for that long to be a competitive NFL football team. If you think this is the quarterback, this is the piece that you plug into the middle of your team and it puts you over the top, why don't we work out a deal? You get that piece now rather than let your window close a little bit over the next year or so. Kirk Cousins is happy, the 49ers are happy, and the Vikings are happy, and that way the Vikings have a little bit of leverage, whereas if they just want to negotiate some kind of extension with Kirk Cousins, they really don't, and the price keeps going up every day.
Yeah, and I'll say this about the leverage play that they could also, if they wanted to bring this up. Kirk is very image conscious, and we know that. I mean, he's got a whole brand team around him. Every quarterback seems to be in this model where you have marketing people, your own special PR people, this brand that you've cultivated and built. And him saying, he wants to stay here in Minnesota, play out the rest of his career. When he signed in 2018, I remember the introductory press conference. That was among the first things he said, that, assuming it all goes well, this is where he'll finish his career. Well, taking a hometown discount doesn't do him any favors.
Right.
But in the image department, for a fan base that has been very skeptical of him, how is that going to look when you want another fully guaranteed deal after you've made buku bucks your entire career? 2 franchise tags, which came at an incredibly high cost.
Yep.
Another fully guaranteed deal, which killed your team's ability to go out and be active in free agency. And then now let's say, and we don't know the figures yet, but let's say that they're sitting on this because they want to have another fully guaranteed deal. That's going to look greedy.
Right.
I'm just saying, I'm trying to play devil's advocate here. If you're looking at this fan base that said, what have you really done? You won us 1 playoff game. What have you actually proven on a consistent basis? And now you want all this extra money? I don't think that's any small factor for someone like Kirk Cousins. I really don't. I think that that weighs into the decision of how he's viewed beyond his team. I mean, his teammates too. I mean, we've asked players, Matthew and I have been in that locker room shortly after Kirk signed, and even, last year, what did that contract do to the locker room?
Mm-hmm.
You see guys, I mean, we talk about this in the CBA, where there's only such a small percentage of players who are making these millions and millions of dollars in the rest of your roster, and what that did to their inability to keep players like Sheldon Richardson, Latavius Murray, all those other guys around last year. Now you want another fully guaranteed contract, potentially? That, I don't know. I just think from the perception factor, the Vikings could use that as a leverage play to be like, look, we like you,
right.
And we like you enough. We want to give you this extension to keep you around now because it's going to help us. But, we've already done a ton for you. We gave you a fully guaranteed deal, 3 years, $84 million. It's unprecedented. It hurts us to do it again. Try to understand that. And, he doesn't, and it's business is business. He doesn't have to agree with that. But I do think from the backlash and the flack that he would get by pushing for another fully guaranteed deal and not agreeing to somewhat of a hometown discount could hurt him.
If I was in his position, it wouldn't factor in as well. But like you said, I'm not Kirk Cousins. He's very image conscious. And if he's going to be in Minnesota long term, he definitely wants to win over the Minnesota fans, especially the ones who are still a little skeptical.
And
of
there
him.
are plenty.
Right.
There are plenty.
Absolutely. No doubt about it.